Hi everyone, I'm Ken Ramos. We're here at RMA and today we're going to talk about some important things that I think that all patients have questions about. So one of the main topics that I think we're going to talk about today is just picking sperm. It might sound simple, it might sound like it just should be an easy thing, but it actually, believe it or not, is something very hard. So to the right of me I have Melissa Keller, who's one of our social workers. She's also a fertility counselor, and she just kind of helps patients with the mental and kind of the stressful emotional side of things. And then to my left I have Maria. She's also my manager, the andrology and endocrine manager. She's going to kind of talk about more of the scientific area and aspects about sperm and just things that not everyone thinks is common knowledge. So if you guys want to take it away.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so like I said before, today we're going to talk about just sperm. And one of the main things that I want to focus on today is just that sperm is something that isn't easy to pick. Everyone has their own decision, and one word that I want to focus on is just yours. And that means that...
Well, you know what? I'm going to jump in here because I think, you know, it's important. We meet with so many different patients here, and there are many different reasons why they may need a sperm donor. So some of our patients that need sperm donors are same-sex female couples that come in, females that are pursuing single motherhood, and then any men that come in who have a male factor issue or infertility. So these are the patients that we see that are coming in and need to use a sperm donor to have a family.
Exactly. So basically what I was trying to say is that everyone has a different path, and then to choose your perfect sperm, you just have to make sure that you kind of hit all these bases and just pick something that works for you. So I also want to hit on one topic, that not all infertility cases are just always female problems or male problems. There's also 40% that are female-oriented problems, 40% that are male aspect problems, and then 20% that we just don't know. So if we could just talk about today kind of the cognitive and kind of some of the emotional stresses that you kind of deal with patients on a day-to-day.
Yeah, sure. So any patient here that is using a sperm donor, our physicians here will refer to myself, I'm a social worker here, or Lisa Schumann, she's also another social worker here, and prior to the start of treatment, and we'll talk about some of the psychosocial, psychoeducational components of working and choosing a sperm donor. So these appointments are really important. I know sometimes people are like, why do I have to meet with the social worker? You know, what's the reason? It's really important to kind of just have that chance to sit down, talk about why you are here, why you have to choose a sperm donor, any emotional difficulties you may be having moving forward, and even just talking about like how to choose a sperm donor, what kind of sperm banks that we're using, and any questions you may have about that. So that will definitely be helpful when you move forward. And you'll also be talking about how to talk to your child or family as well about using a sperm donor.
So in terms of choosing sperm, how do patients, or how can you help patients about going where to find sperm or how to choose sperm, and what different areas, or not areas I would say, but different types of categories are there for different donors?
For different sperm donors. So there's different options out there. Probably one of the most common is to use an anonymous sperm donor through a sperm bank. So you can choose an anonymous sperm donor through a sperm bank. You can choose, there's also through sperm banks, there's identity release donors. Identity release donors are donors that they're still anonymous to the recipients of the sperm donor, but when their child turns age 18, they can have a contact with that sperm donor facilitated through the sperm bank. So it's important for patients to understand that that could be an option for them, because they do have to choose that up front. So they have to understand that that might be something that's important to choose now for their child when their child turns 18. There's also known sperm donors. Known sperm donors are somebody that the patient is related to. They might be a family member, or they're an acquaintance, a good friend, somebody that they know. So those are the different types of sperm donors that you can choose.
Exactly. So when you're explaining this to patients, how do you go about telling them which is the best fit for you? Is it just sort of a case-by-case basis in terms of everyone is just different, and you just kind of have to evaluate what their situation is?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So everyone's different. Everyone comes in and they kind of have an idea of like, you know, what they want to use, but we'll sit down and we'll talk about it, because sometimes using a known sperm donor sounds like a really good idea because you're using someone that maybe shares the genetics in your family, and that's really important to you. But it can get a little more complicated than that, because you want to think about the implications for the family once you have that child, how the dynamics are and how comfortable you'll be, you know, maybe knowing that you have a family member that contributed sperm, you know, for your child. So that's something that's important that we'll talk about. So sometimes people will even say they'll move toward an anonymous donor, you know, even though initially maybe they came in for a known donor. So we'll talk about all of that, you know, in the appointments.
Right. I also wanted to talk about in terms of their child. So later in life, I know you mentioned that some of the sperm donors, you're able to tell them who donated them once they turn 18, the child. How do you go about telling patients whether they should select somebody and tell them that their child later in life that they actually came from somebody that they don't really know?
So I think we're talking about whether we would like disclose to our child, whether, you know, we would tell them that, you know, or the patients would say that they use a sperm donor or wouldn't. So the recommendation is to tell your child that you use a sperm donor. I think it's important for them to know where their genetics are coming from, and, you know, so you'll be able to share that information with them as you go along, like just about the history of the sperm donor. As far as picking an identity release donor, I think you just have to talk to them, just let them know that's an option, and then it's up to them to decide if they feel like that's something that they're willing to do or that's important, you know, for them in the future.
Right. So no, I know it might sound kind of a little silly and kind of a weird question to ask, but in terms of physical attributes, how do you feel about that? I know if you come across a patient who's blonde hair, blue eyes, you might not necessarily want to pick somebody with brown hair, brown eyes. In terms like that, maybe height, other attributes, how do you feel about patients should go about choosing a sperm donor regarding those?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing that everyone's looking for is to have a healthy child. So when you use a reputable sperm bank, they're doing a thorough screening of that sperm donor when you're looking at it. So they should be healthy, you know, there should be a healthy background for them, you know. And then, so beyond that, we're looking at like what's important to that person, like what kind of characteristics do they really want. So you know, that's really up to the patient to decide. But if they, you know, some patients will joke, they'll be like, well, I'm going to pick a sperm donor that's tall because I'm really short. So I definitely want to balance that out a little bit. So it really is just personal. You know, think about the criteria that's important to you. It may not be something that's going to be carried over genetically into your child, but if it's something that's important to you, I think that's important to feel a connection with that donor, so that when you tell your child, you know, you picked this donor, it wasn't only because they were, you know, had brown hair and brown eyes, but you felt there was a connection because they really like sports, or they really like, you know, they're creative or something like that. So it's all personal, but sometimes patients come in, they don't really know, they've never looked at a sperm bank before, so like, what do I even have a choice about? And there's such a wide range of choice, so really kind of narrowing it down to what's the key, what's the most important things that you want.
And one last question for you. So I know you talked about it's always kind of the parent's choice whether they disclose this to their child, but how do you feel about friends and family? Do you feel like they should disclose personal information like that to them, or do you just think that at the end of the day it's your child, you're raising it, and it's just the connection that really matters?
That's a great, you know, question, because I think how you have to look at it is that it's your child's information, and your child's information to share at some point. So, you know, I have a wide range of people. Some patients come in and they're like, we told everybody, you know, we're you know, everyone in our family knows we're using a sperm donor. And then I have some patients that are like, I'm very private, like we're not really going to talk about this right now. I feel like there should be a balance. I think that it's definitely good to talk to people that you're close with for support, but I also feel like you want to keep the circle small, because at some point when your child knows this information, they're going to want to feel like not everybody knows, like they can kind of share it as they want to. So that would be like my best recommendation.
All right, thank you. So, just kind of to summarize, it's just kind of based off patient-to-patient basis. So, like we were saying, that word yours, everyone is different. So, in kind of moving over to a segue, I just want to talk more about the scientific side. So, this is my lovely manager, Maria.
Hi.
So, basically, what I want to ask you is just basically the scientific aspect of sperm. How do you feel about choosing sperm, the different types of sperm, and just how do you just feel about all of that?
So I think that the procedure that's best for each patient is determined by the physician. We can use donor sperm for basically two main procedures, which would be an IUI, which is an intrauterine insemination, or donor sperm can also be used for IVF or ICSI. And I think that Melissa gave us a great summary of how patients go about picking these specimens, and there's a lot to consider when doing that. So I'm just happy to be here, and I think it's a great topic.
Great. So the first question that I kind of have for you, it's a little controversial actually. So home inseminations. I know a lot of people today, they kind of do their own research on Google. They just feel like they can do the things. Why spend all the money on going to a physician and the time to come here, and sometimes even the embarrassment or something like that. So how do you feel about home inseminations, and how do you feel that plays a part into choosing donor sperm?
So I think you brought up a great point, because that's the first thing that even myself, I'm guilty of, looking up something on Google and you get the worst case scenario of things, or even the best case, and some these don't always apply to you. So it's important to speak to your physician or your counselor to get what works best for yourself. And performing an at-home insemination is definitely not recommended. We get a lot of patients that say, "Oh, I just want to pick up my vial and bring it home because I'm going to inseminate myself." It can be dangerous to the patient, and doesn't make optimal use of the specimen either. So if we were to just thaw a vial and go and, let's say, as some patients say, take a turkey baster and inseminate ourselves, we're guaranteed to lose a lot of sperm. Not only are we just placing that specimen into the vaginal canal, which then needs to travel through the canal, the cervix, and get to the uterus. Whereas if they're doing it in-house, we thaw the specimen, we inject it directly into the uterus, so those boys can get to where they need to go and have less distance to travel, which would optimize their chances of fertility. And not only that, it can cause permanent internal damage also. So there are legal repercussions if we were to go and release a specimen to a patient and let them take it home without being under a doctor's care or under a midwife's care. We then are liable for any damage that they may cause to themselves. So we definitely don't recommend it.
Right. So I know you talked about releasing sperm and kind of the sperm that we hold. So some of the questions that I kind of want to ask, what type of sperm are there? What type of vials? What type of washes are there? What do we actually get from the different companies that we order these?
It's a great question. So different sperm banks, in general, there's two main types of specimens. There's IUI ready, which is intrauterine insemination, and then there's ICI ready, which is intracervical insemination. If a patient were to undergo an insemination here at RMACT, we always recommend an IUI ready vial, because those vials can be used for an insemination and for IVF. ICI ready specimens would require us and my awesome techs to wash the specimen and process it to eliminate the freezing media, to also increase the motility of the specimen, or to do our best to do that. So a good rule of thumb is just to order an IUI ready specimen, which would eliminate any sperm washing that we would need to do in-house.
Great. So I also wanted to kind of talk about some of the infectious diseases that are out there. So we all know all of the HIVs, just the different types of infectious diseases that people are always worried about, because you don't know necessarily what you're going to get in a vial all the time. And so one thing that I want you to kind of elaborate on is, what is CMV? How do things like that affect our patient choosing their vial, or in terms of whether they should take a CMV positive vial or a CMV negative vial?
It's a great question. CMV It's a virus that is prevalent in about 50 to 80% of Americans, and it can lay dormant in us for our lifetime.
So it is a common thing then?
It's very common, and most people are CMV positive and don't even know it. So that's why when we have patients coming through our care and also at the donor banks, one aside from the normal infectious diseases, and by normal I mean the common ones, HIV, hepatitis, we also test for their CMV status.
Mm-hmm.
If a patient is CMV positive, it's not the biggest of deals. CMV can cause birth defects. However, when we are selecting a sperm donor, we want to make sure that if we are CMV positive, that we can select CMV negative or positive. However, but if we are negative, we should select CMV negative.
Right.
If we fall in love with the profile of a sperm donor that is CMV positive and we are negative, that's okay too. We do have patients that do that. However, we require them to just sign a CMV waiver, saying that they're aware that the donor that they're picking is CMV positive. And but like I said, it's 50 to 85% is the statistic for Americans that are positive for CMV, and most don't even know.
And one thing that I kind of want to elaborate on is when we get a vial that's either CMV positive, CMV negative, HIV positive, HIV negative, when we store them in our tanks, we have designated tanks for all of these sperms. So it's not that we're all just throwing a whole bunch of sperm in one tank and just calling it a day or anything like that. We're actually taking care of that and just making sure that everything is where it needs to be and just separated. So before all that, actually, where do we order the sperm from? Where do we get them? How can patients go about doing things like that?
We have many banks that Melissa mentioned that we recommend, that we work with, such as Seattle Sperm Bank, California Cryobank, Fairfax. Those are some of the more common ones, in addition to Zytec and New England Cryogenics. So we do work with all of them, and we work very closely. We have our contacts there, and those are the main ones that we recommend here.
Right, so once it arrives in the office, kind of go over what we do. We just kind of check it in. How do we go about that?
So when the vials arrive here, we cross-check all of the consents, make sure that, if a patient signed with us that they wanted vial 1, 2, 3 from California Cryo, that our consents state that that's the donor number that they picked. And we cross-check all of that. We put it into long-term storage on our computer system, and then it goes into the long-term storage tanks in our laboratory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the last questions that I kind of want to ask you is just in terms of the billing. So I know once you have your sperm here stored, we kind of took care of it, separated into different tanks. How do we go about billing patients? How can they expect to be billed just for having their sperm here?
So once our patients bring the specimens in-house, we do offer 3 months free storage here. Some patients use the vials that they've initially ordered within those 3 months. And if they don't and they store them beyond the 3 months, it's $50 for storage each additional month.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I did want to add is that some patients oftentimes call and say, how many do I order? I don't know how many I need. So in general, a good rule of thumb is 1 vial per procedure. So if we are cycling for a month and we know that our doctor recommends 2 IUIs or our insurance allows us to have 2 IUIs in a month, then we recommend 2 vials. If we are undergoing IVF or ICSI, then we recommend 1 vial. They'll only need that 1 vial per cycle for IVF, and 1 vial per insemination is a good rule of thumb. And I also wanted to add that vials should be ordered as soon as possible, because we definitely want to have those vials on site and ready to go when the patient's ready to go. So we want those vials here before the patient even starts their stim cycle. It just helps the transition and the flow of their cycle with us.
Great. Well, thank you, Maria. That kind of shed some insight on all this stuff. So basically, thank you guys for joining us. Today we kind of just talked about sperm. I know it sounds like a real redundant and real simple thing, but it's actually can be very stressful for everyone. As you can tell, Melissa kind of talked about kind of the emotional and some of the stresses that just families go through on a day-to-day on such a simple task, it seems like. And then Maria kind of just touched about just all the things that we go through in terms of scientific analysis and just how we basically bring in sperm. So one of the things that I want you guys to know is just that if you guys have any questions or if you guys actually want to book an appointment or anything like that, just make sure to call a 203-956-2265, and you can go ahead and just call, ask any questions you want regarding that, and just hope you guys had a great day. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, thank you.